Hello, and welcome to Around the Political World with John Rothman. I am your host, John Rothman. If you're a fan of the show, make sure to hit the follow button on the top right of Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you are listening at this very moment. When you hit follow, leave a review or share an episode with a friend. It helps other people discover the show, keeps us going, and as I like to remind you each and every day, it expands our base. This is the second version today, or the second episode today, because a story broke this morning that I had not seen when I recorded the first episode today. According to this news story, former President Donald Trump delivered another litany of false claims during two speeches on Saturday, and he expressed an opinion on American history that certainly contradicts the facts. During a speech to the Faith and Freedom Coalition, a conservative Christian group, which I would suggest to you is really not Christian, it's a right-wing group that uses Christianity as its cover, Trump criticized proposals to change the names of schools, military facilities, and other places that honor slaveholders and Confederate leaders. But what really got to me is this. Trump said this, and I quote, "How about George Washington High School? We want the name removed from that high school. They don't know why. You know, they thought he had slaves. Actually, I think he probably didn't." Now, let me tell you the reason I'm reacting so strongly today. I'm reacting strongly because I was president for 50 years of the George Washington High School Alumni Association. And you will recall the great battle we went through in order to preserve the murals at George Washington High School. Those murals, painted by a Marxist, Viktor Arnatov, highlighted two things about Washington which frankly are not positive. One is the fact that he was a slaveholder, and two, the fact that he led wars against Native Americans. There is a dead Indian, as we called it in those days, portrayed in the mural. And there were those who said, eliminate it, it's terrible. And our defense was quite the contrary. It ought to be there with an explanation of the fact that George Washington did have slaves, and George Washington did wage a war against Native Americans during the period of his life. Now, let's talk about this rationally. George Washington owned slaves. This is an extensively documented fact. At the time of George Washington's death in 1799, there were 317 enslaved people at Mount Vernon, his home and plantation in Virginia, including 123 people owned by Washington himself. All you have to do is go to the website for Mount Vernon, and they have a full explanation of Washington and slavery. No question about it. Washington inherited 10 slaves from his father at age 11. The Mount Vernon website notes that, and I quote directly, as a young man, Washington purchased dozens of enslaved people from estate sales and in private transactions, and that the first U.S. president also rented slaves from others, inherited them from siblings, and enslaved the children who were born to slaves at Mount Vernon. When he married his wife Martha, the website notes, he also gained control of a large number of enslaved people from the estate of her first husband. The list of 317 enslaved people at Mount Vernon at the time of his death included 41 people rented from other plantations and 153 people from Martha's first husband's estate. Do you understand, and I want to say this plainly, that Donald Trump has again distorted history? I'm very proud of George Washington and his role in founding this country. He is arguably one of the greatest presidents and is uniformly accepted as one of the three great presidents of the United States: Washington, Lincoln, and Franklin D. Roosevelt. Those are the three giants. And for Donald Trump to distort George Washington's record is crazy. Let me just say that Washington privately struggled with the idea of slavery. In the last 2 decades of his life, he expressed private support for the idea of abolishing slavery by legislation. But when he died, he immediately freed just one person in his will, his longtime manservant, and decreed that the other slaves he owned ought to be freed upon the death of his wife Martha. She ended up signing a deed to free all of the remaining slaves the year after his death, but she kept the slaves she had inherited herself. This is another example of Donald Trump's ignorance, his distortion of history, and the tragedy it would be if he were elected to another term as president. Let's be clear. We have to tell the truth about history. Whitewashing it, eliminating the George Washington High School murals, or whitewashing what presidents have done, that's not the way you proceed. You tell the truth, and you let the chips fall where they may in terms of debates and discussions by historians. Donald Trump's distortion of history is not new. We've seen it happen repeatedly. But I wanted today to make crystal clear, as my experience at Washington High School with the murals. And please, if you Google George Washington High School, San Francisco murals, you will see the whole thing. You'll see the pictures. You'll understand. What we are doing at Washington High School now is directly creating a curriculum, integrating history, art, literature, in order to teach about the evils of slavery and the fact that you can't cover up history. So I wanted today, both on Around the Political World with John Rothman and on The Voice of San Francisco, to make clear that as clearly as Donald Trump is wrong, it needs to be pointed out, and people need to understand. Distortion of history, distortion of fact is not the way to go when you're talking about the history of this great country. And by the way, many of our founders were slaveholders, and we understand how wrong it was then. Let us put in context what it means when a current leader in this country, a potential future president who was a past president, distorts history. It's just plain wrong. And, well, maybe they'll bring it up in the debate on Thursday. Maybe they'll ask him directly, was George Washington a slaveholder? And you know what? It'll be a good litmus test, because certainly he's getting a lot of feedback from all of us. I'm John Rothman. Thanks for tuning into another episode of Around the Political World. Make sure to follow along. Let me know your thoughts on the show by leaving a review on Apple Podcasts and sharing an episode with a friend or colleague so we can continue to grow, which is our goal. And when you tune into The Voice of San Francisco, well, you'll get commentary on local issues. But I want to urge you, remember, truth when you're running for president is important, particularly if you're a former president of the United States. And let me tell you something. It would appear to me that Donald Trump is a slave to untruth, that he is a slave to distortion of fact. And that, my friends, is the last thing we want in a president of the United States.